All right, seeing that we're streaming and recording and that it is 12:05, I would like to convene our meeting today. This is the Council on Sexual Misconduct Climate Assessments. Today is January 25th, 2022, and it is 12 p.m. So thank you all for being at our meeting today. As you hopefully saw, Jeannie did, thank you, Jeannie, send out the agenda for today's meeting. So we're going to start with the introduction of anybody that might be new today. We are going to be discussing our subcommittee meetings that were held last week and some of the takeaways from those meetings. And then we are going to move into a discussion of the deliverables that, based on our discussions at those subcommittee meetings, we've really been able to dial in and figure out what we want the deliverables for this council to look like. So I just want to talk about what needs to be completed, what that timeline looks like, and create a concrete plan for its completion. And then I do want to talk about the future of our meeting, seeing as we may have some deliverables in the near future. I want to see what else we may want to meet about to potentially evaluate moving forward. And then we'll have some space for miscellaneous comments or concerns that folks may have if there's something that doesn't necessarily fit into the meeting agenda that you would like to bring to the table. So thank you all very much for meeting. Seeing as we have a smaller group today, if we wanted to do a brief roll call, I would be totally all right with that. If each individual would just like to share their name and the institution that they are here representing, that would be great. So I can start, and then perhaps we can just sort of popcorn. I'll call someone's name and they can call it next. So my name is Bridget Kessner, she, her, hers. I am the Education and Youth Services Coordinator for the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence. I'm going to popcorn to Kara.
Hi, I'm Kara Mackler, the Director of Campus Services at the Center for Empowerment and Education. And I can popcorn to Kristen.
You're muted. We couldn't hear you.
I think it was a volume issue because you look like you're unmuted, but we unfortunately aren't able to hear you.
How about now?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, Zoom's been having a lot of issues for me as well. I was saying my name is Kristen Eshwe. I'm project coordinator at Sacred Heart. And actually I picked you, Stacy, so it was funny when you started speaking.
Thanks, Kristen. Stacy Miller, I work at Central Connecticut State University, and I'm the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion. Sorry, I'm supposed to pick someone. I'll go to Colleen.
Thanks, Stacy. Hi, I'm Colleen Carney. I'm the project director with the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities, representing the community colleges of Connecticut. Happy to be here. Great to see everyone. Go ahead, Lily.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lily Svensson. I'm the director of Yale's Office of Institutional Research. And I'll pass to Irene.
Good morning, or actually good afternoon, everybody. Irene Haynes, state rep and ranking on higher ed. Oh, I'm sorry, Josh.
You, Representative Haynes. I am Josh Elliott, representative and co-chair with my Senate co-chair, Derek Slapp, who I will pass off to now.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, State Senator Derek Slapp, representing the 5th State Senate District, West Hartford, Farmington, Bloomfield, and Burlington, and Senate Chair of the Higher Education Committee. And I think, did everybody go? Maybe Jeannie did not go? Is that it? Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. My apologies.
I'm Lisa Giliberto. I'm with the Victim Rights Center, which is a division of the Alliance to End Sexual Violence. And I could popcorn to Jeannie.
I'm Jeannie Phillips, and I'm the staff for the council.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for reintroducing yourselves. It's great to see everybody here, and I know you're all returning members, so thank you for joining us again. So I just wanted to quickly review some of the most important points of our meeting discussion from our subcommittee meetings last week. If you wanted to see some more in-depth notes, those are available to anybody that wants to access them over on our group's Google Drive. But just to kind of go over the subcommittees themselves, the first subcommittee was tasked with reviewing what data points need to be collected based on the enabling legislation, which really sort of spells out what these institutions need to look at as a sort of baseline, as well as what tools might want to be recommended based on their review of the tools that were provided by some of our council members. And then the second committee met to discuss implementation guidelines. So how we could sort of provide some assistance to institutions in providing recommendations for what methods they could utilize for implementing assessments on their campuses to folks. So just starting with that first subcommittee meeting, we really talked about the importance of ensuring that each of these tools meet the needs of the enabling legislation. I know Ali Hikini, who isn't here with us today, at least yet, from the Every Voice Coalition, talked about the fact that Massachusetts was before us in, providing some of these deliverables based on their legislation. And so Ali was going to follow up to share what those deliverables looked like to see if there was anything that we could sort of review and go off of there. We had a really in-depth conversation about anonymity and confidentiality. And we all sort of unanimously agreed that we want to ensure that this instruments that are utilized are as anonymous as possible, especially when we're taking into account the fact that we want to ask about some demographics, right? And we also want to acknowledge a felt sense of anonymity. So even if we know that this information will remain anonymous, we want to ensure that those students that might be taking these surveys are going to feel safe and comfortable taking them, with the need for anonymity in mind. We want to, of course, recognize the importance of demographics and don't want to take away from collecting them, but rather ensure that we're being careful about how they're being collected. And we also want to consider really what information needs to be collected and where should it go, right? Who can see it? Where is it stored? How is it analyzed? We talked about utilizing outside vendors for analysis, which has been helpful for some folks, as well as providing some preface as to how the data is going to be used by the institutions. We also talked a little bit about wanting to potentially provide some questions as to if drugs or alcohol were an aspect of the narrative of sexual violence that students may have experienced, as well as if they had any hesitation to report around that, or if there was an awareness of the amnesty policy that they have as a result of this legislation as well. And then we also talked about how we could potentially provide some guidance to certain institutions about what instruments would be most helpful for them to utilize. In regards to the implementation discussion with that second subcommittee, we talked about the development of an implementation checklist so that institutions would sort of have a guideline as to what they need to provide based on the enabling legislation, how they could, collect that data effectively, and how they could potentially be implementing the information that they gain from that data collection. We also talked about potentially having some sort of help that would be available, right? Having some sort of directory or information. In addition to resources that may be on hand, we want to ensure that institutions that have questions may have someone to reach out to. We talked about the possibility of sort of triaging, right? I would be somebody based on my position, I'd be happy to help sort of triage individuals to the individual that might be most helpful for them based on their question. However, I don't want to necessarily gatekeep or have anybody, feel as if they're not receiving contact directly from folks. So I'd be interested to hear what everyone's thoughts would be when we discuss sort of these deliverables in regards to what that triaging process could look like or what this directory process could look like. We also talked about providing some preface to the institutions of why we utilized the term assessment in this legislation, and the fact that, assessment is a broader term, right, than when we're considering a survey itself, and that they have some flexibility in what sort of tool they'd like to utilize and what process they want to go through to gather information. And then since that meeting, I've received a couple of follow-up questions, one of which was about the publication of the results, right, of these assessments. So I just wanted to clarify that the information that would be collected, as you'll see in the enabling legislation, this is going to be published to the institution's website. It needs to be publicly available there. And then that information will be submitted to the Committee of Employment, Advancement, and Higher Ed, right? So I just wanted to clarify that this is information that's going to be made available to the public. So we want to ensure that we're including that in that implementation checklist as to what institutions need to be getting done. So I just wanted to open up the conversation in case there's anything anybody wanted to note, if there's anything I missed before we start to kind of discuss some of the content that's in these folders, what we've been drafting, and other sort of documents that we have available at this time. But were there any important points that anybody would like to make from those meetings that they'd like to bring to the table? Okay. Not seeing any hands. So we have, hopefully you've all had a chance to review at least briefly some of the content that we have in these folders. We have some documents regarding implementation recommendation. This is under the subcommittee 2 folder. Thankfully, there's a lot of information out there as to how institutions can implement, assessments and surveys at their institution in a way that is trauma-informed, in a way that ensures that they're really getting a broad collection from the student body, that folks feel comfortable engaging with these assessments. So rather than remake the wheel, we kind of discussed as a group what it would look like to refer to these documents, after reviewing and vetting them and ensuring that we're happy with all of the content within them. We talked about providing some reference to them rather than attempting to essentially remake them, right? And then similarly, in the folder where we have the tools for review, we talked about referring to tools that may be helpful in different environments, right? So say you have a commuter school versus a residential school, and there's a certain tool that really might speak to students' experience better and allow more students to participate. Or perhaps implementation guidelines that are specifically kind of designed with those students' needs in mind. So we talked about kind of reviewing some of those tools to see where those different characteristics of campuses might be referenced. You could potentially point campuses to the best tools, including implementation guidelines that would apply to them. So that's kind of a general guideline of where we're at and where we've come to and what we've identified as, what we need to accomplish. So I know we've already started drafting some content as well, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I know Lily has put together a really excellent document to sort of track some of the deliverables in this project. So Lily, if that's something you would like to speak to, I would be happy to give you a couple of moments to pull that up if it's not on hand. But I would definitely be happy if you'd like to kind of walk people through that document. Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So I actually have it pulled up. So do you want me to just share my screen and kind of scroll through and show
where
Yeah,
we
that'd
are?
be fantastic.
So folks should be seeing my browser window. So what you're seeing is a Google Doc that's in the committee's or in the council's Google Drive folder that Bridget's put together. This is something that might look familiar to a few folks from our last meeting. What I did was just took my notes that I was developing in Word and then sent them to Bridget, who loaded them into a Google document.
Lily, can you make it a little bit bigger?
Oh yes, okay, here we go.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Okay. I know when we're
Thank you for asking.
screen sharing makes everything really tiny. So thank you for the reminder. So in addition to the points, or kind of along with the points that Bridget was describing, what I tried to do was gather kind of where the discussion was leading last time around in our subcommittee meetings, to try to track kind of what this all would mean for a set of deliverables. So one thing that kind of came up in our last discussion was that it might be meaningful and useful for whatever package of materials this council produces to be prefaced with a little bit of an orienting description. So not something super long, kind of almost a paragraph or two, but just describing kind of what this council is trying to do and kind of what a user would find in the materials we put together. And this could be a place to note, for example, the intentional use of the word assessment, as Bridget was mentioning. So then the rest of this document is split into two parts. One is really about sort of the topics of the survey. That's our sort of what we've been thinking about, our subcommittee one, that work. And then what I've done is tried to put in bold some headings to call out what would be a deliverable. So for example, one thing that this council could produce is to actually do the work of gathering available instruments into one place as PDFs, for example, or in whatever format they're available. Another piece of work this council could do would be to then synthesize the sort of pertinent information about the instruments that we're gathering to kind of do that in a way that also breaks out where there is a ready-made survey instrument dealing with required topics for instruments, and where some of these same survey instruments would deal with additional topics that have come up in our council's discussion that we might call out as recommended, but that are not written into the legislation. And that I think, you know, we have a little bit of a start of a list here. This document is one that's able to be edited, and I think there are a lot of topics that aren't on the list yet, and kind of breakout topics as well. There are some elements of survey design, like anonymity and confidentiality and the relationship between those two, and some other aspects of survey design that are not actually the questions asked by a survey, but there are other elements of survey design. They also kind of fit within the bounds of implementation guidelines, so it's a little bit of a gray area. There's some kind of repetition of those in parts 1 and part 2. The second part of this document tries to do the same thing, but around the implementation guidelines that this council needs to produce. So starting out with pulling together the pieces of enabling legislation that relate most clearly to implementation guidelines, just so they're kind of in one place. They're in a couple of places in the legislation. So I wanted to kind of pull them together. In reviewing them, it seemed like one thing that could be a big value add for schools in Connecticut would be almost a reprint of the legislation, but with additional formatting to make it easier to kind of use it as a checklist. So that is something that I've broken out here as in bold as something that we could produce. Some other potential deliverables that came up in the discussion are also called out here in bold. There was an idea of sort of, can we provide some examples of how to tell students or other surveyed populations about confidentiality or anonymity, or could we provide some examples of effective ways that institutions so far have kind of introduced an assessment to their students? Because those sort of introductory statements oftentimes cover a lot of bases, including informed consent, how data will be stored, who would have access to the data. So there's a lot there. And if it would work from a compliance and sort of institutional sort of perspective for us to offer something that we say could be used kind of off the shelf, that could be also a beneficial thing for us to be able to pull together and share. But again, I'm not sure kind of what the sensitivities around doing that might be. This is again a place where we could really, I think, help institutions by pulling together the various documents that already exist about how to run these kinds of assessments and how to use the data. And then we also talked about kind of what array of points those different documents already make. Some of them we wanted, it sounded like, to kind of highlight even more in kind of a synthetic way, but then it also seemed like this was a place where creating kind of a grid of, you know, okay, here are the things that an institution has to do. Where can they get help doing that with the materials that are already available online? And then here are some other not required, but recommended sort of issues for thought for institutions as they're planning these assessments. Again, this is sort of, this is just a draft list, and I saw in Hillary's notes, she had started to kind of add in some additional suggestions. I think, Bridget, your meeting notes from last time include some more as well. So again, this is a place where I started to add some blank rows as a signpost that this list isn't done. But you know, it sounded like we were kind of making a start there. And that's the end of the document. So as I was putting this together, and again, this is in our folder, so I'm going to stop share. So as I was putting this together, I think I was realizing that there are a few sort of higher level questions. One of them, Bridget, thank you for bringing up, was sort of the question of, would this set of proposed materials accomplish what our council has been set out to do? And relatedly, are there any materials that we're suggesting to produce that would sort of fall past some bright line that that we really should not be proposing as something that we would produce? So those questions of would we be accomplishing our task are maybe more for our legislative colleagues who are joining the call today. And then there are some other questions that are really more about logistics. So in addition to kind of, are these the right things and how would we produce them given the time that we have? You know, there are also some kind of technical questions, like we're proposing, given this idea so far, pulling together a lot of material, which, I mean, we're not talking about enormous files electronically, but fairly numerous files. So kind of where would those live online, and what mechanism exists to help pull them together? Is that something that would be, you know, that we could kind of post them to this council's page online? There's like a technical component of how we would even get our deliverables out there. So those are some of the questions that were coming to mind for me as I was putting this together, in addition to just whether this makes sense to others in the group.
Yeah, thank you so much for your guidance through that document, Lily, and thank you so much for drafting it. You know, in my own opinion, I think it's a really, really helpful tool to sort of get us all together in one place and put this content together here. And I agree. I definitely, part of what I'm hoping to discuss at our meeting today in terms of our deliverables, I think you really hit a lot of those points, right? Drafting a preamble, confirming what tools we want to recommend, have a plan to gather those tools into PDFs or some format for distribution, gathering some information about each tool so we can provide some guidance around which tools should be used and considered. Looking at that implementation checklist based on the legislation, right? Not rewriting it, but essentially just reformatting it to ensure that each institution is kind of meeting each of those marks. Talking about the implementation issues and the tools that speak to them. And then, as I shared earlier, I definitely want to provide some resource for follow-up if institutions need an email, a phone number, right, of someone they can reach out to. And then I also want to discuss today, you know, based on everyone's feedback, a solid plan for distribution. So what would distribution of our deliverables look like to really ensure that they're accessible to institutions and the individuals at institutions that would be responsible for this. So I'm really just, based on all of what Lily just shared and based on, you know, the other points that I just added, I would be curious to know if anybody off the bat has any general feedback, and then maybe we can move through this point by point, what sort of our own essentially implementation checklist as to how to distribute an implementation checklist. So I would be kind of interested to go through our deliverables and to-dos piece by piece to sort of sort out who's interested in what piece, in terms of their own participation, how much time would be necessary to complete it, and exactly what that deliverable will look like, right? Is it a PDF? Is it a checklist of sorts? So off the bat though, does anybody have any general feedback about Lily's tool or about kind of this list of deliverables?
I just wanted to say it looks great. Thank you for putting it all together. It's really helpful.
Thanks, Karen, for your feedback, and seeing no other hands, I guess we'll sort of move forward on a, you know, kind of each item and discuss them individually. And as Lily had mentioned as well, going through that document, as well as the other content in our folder, I did hear from Hillary, who's a member of this council, who was unable to make it today, but has really provided a lot of great feedback in those docs. So I'd highly recommend checking out Hillary's comments and feedback. I think that there are additional points that she makes that we need to keep in our consideration. And I definitely will be reaching out to her to see which of these sort of deliverables she'd like to continue to provide input on to ensure we have that voice at the table, as well as, of course, other council members that were unable to be in attendance today. So I guess kind of starting at the top, when we talk about drafting this preamble, aside from the points that have already been discussed in our subcommittee meetings as to how we want to kind of orient, the readers to, the document and the guidance we'll be providing, the fact that we want to kind of talk about the difference, right, in the word assessment and the word and survey, and why we're being intentional with the word assessment. Is this an aspect of the project that anybody feels that they particularly have some, input they'd like to provide? I mean, this is something I'd be glad to provide a bit of information on, just based on my participation in the legislation and sort of selecting the language, collectively, of course, not personally, but I would be happy to provide some input from that perspective. But I can definitely, within our document, if anybody wants to contribute their own knowledge based on, their work, or based on, the needs that they might identify from the institution, I would definitely welcome that. And I do want to ensure we have, all perspectives included, but I can ensure that preamble is at the very least drafted in the doc, and then will be subject to more edits. But I'll be doing so inside of Lily's document there. So I wanted to just review the tools really quickly. And based on everyone's review of these tools, I do want to, as I know we've looked over these tools, I do want to really verify that we can, with full confidence, say that each tool does meet the needs of the enabling legislation, namely the data points that are outlined. So if a couple folks wouldn't mind kind of going through those with a fine-tooth comb, just keeping in mind the data points that need to be collected, I would definitely be thankful for that. Is that something that anybody feels that they can kind of move forward in digging through?
I could definitely help with that.
Great. That would be awesome. And then maybe we can just have a note on the doc indicating that, each of the tools kind of meet what needs to be done. I think at this point, based on what's been provided, I'm fairly confident, but I see Lily's hand is up, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I would be happy to help as well. It's always easier to kind of split it up. And what I started to do as well is just take the kind of running list of topics that we're talking about as required versus recommended. I just dropped those into a Google spreadsheet that I'll also share with our folder, so that it just makes it easier to kind of for someone to be looking at one instrument at a time and kind of going row by row, and to have room to not only say like, yes, this particular survey includes a question about this, but also where did I find that? Because that's harder to keep track of, especially in a document that's kind of designed like our Word document is right now. That's that more of the kind of condensed view of just yes, no, does this exist? And not giving room for kind of the maybes or things that, the council might want to talk through a little bit more. So I'll kind of keep putting that together and share that as well. And I can do the same thing for the second part as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Is there any feedback in regards to, and before I move forward with that, I also want to share that I want to also ensure that we're, as a group, satisfied with the tools that are recommended based on, the needs of the enabling legislation, but also if there are any other questions or concerns that people have about tools included in the drive. That's something you can feel free to reach out to me. If you'd like me to present your concerns, it's something I want you to feel free to present to the group. But if there's some concern about accessibility or something that you don't like about a certain tool that you want to ensure is noted, in the deliverables that we're creating, definitely bring that to the table to ensure that that's included. That's something you can either bring to the table at today's meeting or, reach out to me individually or create a note in our folder. But that being said, off the bat, are there any concerns that anybody's noted with any of these tools that they wanted to bring to the table? Colleen.
Not so much a concern, just a question about, are we required to use these tools that we're recommending, or would a school have the opportunity to select a tool that is not recommended if they were to hit those recommended, data points that we want? Could we select our own? And the reason I ask is because of course, I think a lot of schools are going to look at the tools that we recommend and probably go with some of those. Those are excellent recommendations. My concern is around cost, because the community colleges are so, we have a different perspective on this in terms of like the questions we might want to ask, because we're not we're a commuter school. So just want to make sure that there's some flexibility around the choice of a tool. I believe that that we are still free to choose a tool that works for us, as long as we are hitting those required data points, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's a really important question and something definitely to bring to the table. So the enabling legislation is in the doc, and I do have it up. And based on my understanding of that legislation, provided that the data points, that our council designates, so not only those in statute, but also if there are any additional points that we as a council deem is necessary for institutions to ask. So say, I know, we had talked about drugs and alcohol, say, and say we all conclude that that's something that we want to ensure is asked about. That's a data point that will need to be collected, regardless of what tool is utilized. But the tools, again, based on my interpretation of the language, really would indicate that the actual tools that we're recommending are sort of resources and recommendations rather than what needs to concretely be utilized. And I know in terms of when we were evaluating different tools and implementation processes that could be considered, we want to, as one of those kind of line items, speak to cost, right? And say that a certain tool may be more accessible to one institution versus another, depending on what their budget will look like for this sort of project. So that's definitely something we can speak to, but again, and anyone feel free to raise your hand and jump in if you had a different understanding. But I do believe that provided the institution, utilizes the data points, it says, yep. So it says Any institution may use a sexual misconduct climate assessment, including but not limited to one recommended by the council or developed by an institution of higher education or a national association, provided such assessment collects all of the data points developed by our council. So a long-winded answer, but I hope I answered.
No,
the
that's
question.
very helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Great, not a problem. And I think that that's something we can definitely ensure is clarified as well. So it's an important point, I think, to clarify, whether it be within our preamble or within the kind of implementation, discussion in our document. I know Lily had talked about in terms of being able to actually provide these documents, kind of creating a collection of PDFs. Does anybody have any other suggestions in regards to the distribution of the recommended tools? Any feedback as to what would make them most accessible and ensure institutions know where to find them? Lily?
I was actually wondering if Jeannie might have some ideas in this regard, if there are mechanisms kind of already in place that we could use as well at the state level.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Jeannie, is that something you would be able to speak to? Perhaps not at the moment, but I can always follow up because I think that is something that, again, as so much of this project, I think we don't want to recreate the wheel. But so if there's a mechanism in place that we could use to distribute this, I think that would be great. Okay.
Sorry, Bridget.
No, go right ahead.
In my head, is kind of something the way I've been envisioning it, and I don't know, and Jeannie would probably be best to answer. When we kind of send all this out as like a PDF document, if we're able to kind of within that include like the links basically to the recommended tools, maybe like a quick little blurb. This is this tool. Here's the link if you wish to look at this. Like that's kind of how I've been envisioning it. I don't know if that would be the easiest way, but.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think we also, depending on the tool, because I know some might, I don't know, if it would be easier to distribute them via PDF or link, but I think even potentially utilizing both options. So ensuring that, that they could be linked on the page, but also available via PDF on the same page that our larger document is sort of a supplemental collection, right? So I think even providing more than one option can kind of, increase the accessibility of these tools. So, in regards to kind of, I know we talked about, kind of going through these tools to see how they might or might not, but I think all of these should at this point include the data points in the legislation. I also want to ensure that we sort of go through each tool and gather information based on the needs of different institutions. So kind of these points that Lily laid out based on our discussion from the last meeting, I want to ensure that we're able to sort through and speak to these different points. I know Kara shared one of the tools, for instance, had a really great section on a student perception of safety. So where we could kind of acknowledge in our document that this is a tool that is great to refer to for this piece. So I was wondering if anybody who's interested in sort of reviewing the tools that are on hand, if there would be any interest in providing some of that feedback.
So you're looking for someone to go through each instrument, the survey instruments that we're offering, and say, oh, this has a great section on such and such and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking? I mean, I don't know if I could do all of them. They're pretty long, but I can certainly volunteer to do one or some.
Yeah, absolutely. And more than one person can, we can coordinate it so that
Okay.
maybe we have, if say, I think we have 4 tools at this point that we're kind of sifting through, right? So if we have, say, 4 individuals that want to each volunteer to kind of take on one instrument.
Sure.
Yeah, I see Kara's hand is up.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'd be happy to volunteer to do that as well.
Great. Great, thank you. Lily has her hand up to volunteer. And Deborah?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd be happy to take one as well, if you want to give me one.
So I can reach out to ensure I coordinate the 4 of you in an email to kind of decide, unless you would like to decide right here and now who would like to take each.
Just send me
But-
one and I promise to go through it.
Lovely. All right. So I can randomly assign the instruments, and you can feel free to all go through those and see, what points you think are potentially strong based on the needs of different institutions. And as you're doing so, refer to the list that we have, in the document as to what exactly we're seeking. Okay, just making notes. I apologize for the brief pause. Okay. So I know we talked about the implementation checklist, so kind of taking this legislation and ensuring it's kind of in a format where institutions have clarity on what they actually need to accomplish at a minimum, right? So I would be happy to help work on this or review it. If anybody wants to jump in and volunteer, feel free as well. But is this a project that anybody feels that they have some they would like to contribute to? I definitely would be happy to draft something out, but if anybody else who kind of has attention to detail, as well as I would be really happy if perhaps somebody, one of our legislative partners, would like to just check it over to ensure that I represent the legislation properly. But I can definitely reach out to individuals kind of for feedback following my creation of that. So we also talked about the implementation issues in summarizing what we want to consider when it comes to implementation. Again, these are things that came up in our meeting, and the tools do speak to them, as well as some of the implementation documents that are provided in that subcommittee 2 folder. So I know we've already started to very, very basically lay a groundwork for what issues we'd like to speak to and what the concerns are based on each topic. I know that this is something Hillary expressed having interest in providing feedback on, so perhaps I won't volunteer her time for her, but it's something I'll see if she has time for feedback on. As well as for all these topics, I would be glad to reach out to other folks. And if anybody's watching today's stream but was unable to attend, please feel free to reach out to me if there's anything you'd like to participate in. But does anybody want to kind of help to outline some of these implementation issues? And perhaps the tools that speak to them, or the documents that speak to them, and sort of cite them within.
So do you mean kind of going through the documents that we've pulled together so far and kind of reading for whether they contain discussion of these different topics? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Essentially, similarly to the task of sifting through the tools themselves, this would be sifting through the implementation information to ensure that we can speak to different implementation issues while potentially, citing those tools for further information. And this is something I'm happy to help with as well, just given my knowledge in this piece.
Yeah, I'm happy to help with that too.
Great. Yeah, I can definitely, I think, reach out to our, Lily, our second subcommittee there, and see, who in that group who, we were discussing implementation would like to contribute. So I do want to open up the conversation too, to talk about resources for follow-up. This was something I mentioned. I think it is always important to be able to provide a point of reference for folks that may have further questions that aren't defined in the document, to ensure that they can reach someone that can actually talk them through different concerns they might have. Maybe they're seeking an institution that's also working with the same tool, right, to see what kind of they're coming up against and how they've handled different challenges or questions. So as I said, I'm happy to be a source to kind of help triage some of those requests, given my position working with any institution in the state that is seeking technical assistance. I work with our campus advocates statewide that are on the college campuses and on the resource teams. I coordinate with, our legislative partners on different issues. So based on kind of my overarching position there, I would be happy to help triage. But as I stated earlier, I also don't want to seem as if I'm gatekeeping or kind of, anything, creating kind of a middleman that isn't necessary, right? So middle person. So does anybody have any feedback on that process in regards to creating sort of a directory or an individual for any further resources or feedback?
Bridget, I think part of my struggle right now with this is just since we don't necessarily know how we're rolling it out fully, if it's like a website, if we can maybe think of some frequently asked questions, because I also don't want you to be inundated by all of these, people from across the state reaching out to just you.
Sure.
So, if we could create some sort of frequently asked questions, and then maybe kind of if your question isn't answered here, this could be a good person to reach out to, because I'm also just not sure of who the people to reach out to would be necessarily right now. So sorry, that wasn't probably super helpful.
No, I think it was. And I think that that's something, that was a potential route we discussed as well, is what it could look like if we created sort of a list of okay, if you have a question about this particular topic, this is somebody you could reach out to. Again, kind of cutting out that middle person, right? So that's definitely a route we can take. And I think the ask there would just be that if we created sort of, as we're going through this, if we created a few points that we're thinking, okay, I think people might really have questions, say, about some of these implementation issues, and or okay, I think people are really going to need some support in evaluating the success of the tool that they implemented. We would definitely need folks that would be willing to sort of volunteer to have an ongoing role in providing that support more directly without kind of getting an email from me or somebody else who's sort of triaging to say, here's somebody that wants to connect, but folks that are going to be available to kind of receiving emails, from somebody at another institution, or from an institution if you're, from an organization, another organization here. But perhaps as we're going through, we can kind of identify some points, and this could even be something, I know we're going to discuss future meetings and future conversations we can have as a council, as we kind of complete these deliverables, right? Kind of what comes next. But I think that this could be a point as we're kind of going through all of this to see, to say, you know, where do we think institutions will need support and who could provide that support and who can, and is that person willing to volunteer in that capacity? But I think that that would be a great method. I just, you know, again, don't want to put it on, I don't want to volunteer other folks necessarily, which is why I wanted to provide another solution. But I also appreciate your thoughtfulness in my own inbox, in the state of it. Okay, so I think this is something we can kind of have an ongoing conversation about, and perhaps have as a supplemental tool, depending on how we create a, you know, our document here. And then lastly, I do want to talk about the distribution plan, but I know we kind of brought that up, and perhaps I can check in with Jeannie to see what is already in place, right? And what we could potentially utilize and build on based on, you know, those existing mechanisms. So I would be glad to talk about our timeline a little bit. So based on this, I do sort of believe that we could realistically put together a final draft of a deliverable for these institutions, you know, before we actually all coordinate again. I think given that, you know, it's clear what tasks are necessary and a few folks have volunteered to complete those tasks, you know, I think that we can sort of move forward in the creation and final drafting, and then sort of all collectively, right, do some final edits on that piece before perhaps collectively approving it. But based on everyone's availability, based on your workload, based on the projects you've just volunteered for, I just wanted to kind of gauge how much time folks feel as if they might need on this council to complete, you know, each of their designated portions, and then ultimately a final review of the deliverable here.
I'll throw out like 2 weeks from now, maybe, as the time to complete the tasks, and maybe another week after that to review.
Okay. Seeing some head nods. Any other feedback? Okay, that's definitely helpful. And I think, so I think we will move forward with that unless there's some significant concern that's expressed by anybody else. And I think in the interim during that 2 weeks as well, you know, I'll reach out to Jeannie and anybody else that I may need to in regards to that distribution plan. And I may be reaching out to some of you because I especially from institutions of higher education, would like to know, again, how to make this most accessible and how we can ensure it gets to the attention of you know, the individuals that we need to in each of these spaces. Any other sort of questions or comments about moving forward?
I just wanted to share with the group that I've put together a couple of Google Sheet templates for folks to use. One to use if you're kind of reviewing the different documents that offer canned instruments, and another one if you're reviewing documents for implementation guidelines.
Lily, where are these docs? Are they in that Council on Sexual Misconduct Climate Assessment folder that Bridget created, or is it somewhere else? Because I'm in that folder and I keep looking for things and I can't see anything.
Somehow I think I'm not able to upload.
Okay.
So I just shared them with Bridget
Gotcha.
just now. So
So Bridget, you'll drop them into that folder?
Yep. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
some folks have been able to upload and some haven't, I think perhaps based on the like email domains and whatnot.
I
So if
definitely
you
have
have
access to the folder. So as soon as you drop it in there, I should be able to see it immediately, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so like the document I was showing earlier is already in the subcommittee 2 folder.
It is? Okay.
So
That's
if
what I
you-
was,
It
Oh, I
has like
see
a
it.
little blue
yeah.
W.
It says HB 6374. Okay, I got it. Thank
So
you.
that was the,
And now you've created 2 other templates for the 2 other pieces, so we can, and you're gonna put it in the same folder? Or you
or
can put it outside the folder?
I'll probably put it in the general folder.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll probably put it in just the general folder for our group here.
Okay.
Because it doesn't necessarily just individually speak to one subcommittee or another.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it'll be up once our meeting is over today, but just in order to stay present, I have been keeping my Zoom window up exclusively.
would it be helpful for me to just put those up so folks know kind of what?
Sure. If you'd like to just give a little overview, that would be great.
So these aren't in the folders yet, but they will be soon, and they're able, once they're there, folks should please feel free to edit them and so on. So you should be seeing what looks like an Excel file. I created 2 files. One for implementation guidelines, tracking the contents of reference documents, and the other assessment instruments and tracking the included topics. For each of these, I thought rather than folks needing to make multiple whole copies, we could just add tabs. So like if you're reviewing a particular instrument, what you can just do is duplicate the template tab, and my computer sort of decided to freeze, but once you hit duplicate, you could just kind of rename your tab. Let's say I was reviewing the AAU instrument. Like now this is just a sandbox where one person could be going through and going row by row and saying, all right, does this instrument actually ask about the elements of this required component? On what pages? What are the question numbers? Are there notes or questions back for this group? I imagine there'll be some questions kind of for clarification, or does this really count? That kind of thing. And then would you say, this is particularly, like this particular instrument is really strong in this area? And we can kind of add on, especially to the template, with other topics, that we want to flow through as folks are reviewing. So that's how both of these sheets are constructed. So we would end up with multiple tabs that we could then go through and kind of condense just the yes, no part of that, and maybe like an asterisk for it's particularly strong or something in this kind of crosstabs version that we were discussing before.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for working on that. I really appreciate all your organization. Kara, I see your hand is up.
I think that's excellent. Can I suggest we add a column of the council member that is making the notes? That way, like, I know there's 4 of us that volunteered, but if I wanted to look at another tool that someone else had already looked at, we can kind of peer review in a way, and check on the other tools, and then we know who's looked them over.
I see Kristen's hand is up.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. So do we have two kind of groups going? One, just making sure the deliverables are met on the tool, and the other making sure, like, seeing what, this tool really was strong in this area. Like, is that's how we divide it?
Yeah, so I do think it's important that we have like individuals to really verify that the data points that need to be collected are indeed in these tools, and how they are phrased, right? And I think just based on how prescriptive the legislation is about those particular points and references it multiple times as necessary for these institutions to have on hand, I think it will be helpful to have someone kind of go through with a fine-tooth comb and kind of say, yes, they are here. Yes, this tool meets the threshold of one that we can recommend. So I think that that's kind of one piece. And then I think a second is evaluating, okay, well, which university might find it more helpful to frame the question the way that the survey does, right? So I do think it's two different pieces, but folks can feel free to jump in and if you think it would be preferable to combine.
Yeah, I'm fine keeping in two. I just got a little confused by the sheet for a second because I thought it kind of was listing both things. So I just wasn't sure if I missed a step in our conversation or if I was just reading it wrong. So just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of verifying that they're there so we can essentially clear them for use. All right, any other questions about this next steps in this process before I just want to move quickly to discussing the fourth kind of task that we may have ahead of us. But anything else before we move on? Great. So aside from these three pieces that we've discussed as a council thus far, being the data points, identifying data points, tools that include those data points and that we can recommend, and then the implementation guideline piece. The last sort of task that our council has listed is to perform such other acts that may be necessary and appropriate to carry out the duties described in this section. Given the long-term position we're all in with these council appointments, I believe they expire in 2026. Of course, we're not going to need to meet on such a regular basis following, the creation and distribution of our deliverables here. But I do think, personally, and I'm interested to hear input on what this could look like, or if you think anything else is necessary. But personally, I do think that'll be important to kind of get together at some point moving forward to evaluate the success of our methods and projects and our deliverable, right? And to receive some feedback about those deliverables from the institutions that actually did utilize them. So I wanted to see what everybody's thoughts were about that, as well as if you had any other input or questions about kind of miscellaneous tasks, essentially, that may be necessary. Lily?
I guess I wonder if this could also be something that there could be a mechanism for collecting feedback from institutions. If I really liked Kristen's idea before, sort of, could we provide the documents themselves, but also some links, a little bit of a one-stop shopping area. If that could also have almost like a web form for feedback. I don't know if that has been done for other forms of legislation or other examples of this kind of work where there's sort of some resource that's being pushed out at the state level, and then there's going to be a process of revisiting, which I think is really important, and where we would want to to know kind of how it's been going, and where there might be some blank spots in what we've put together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having something like that, having some sort of form and having that space for feedback is definitely something that would be great for us to all discuss and create. And this is a bit, this we can talk about for, over the course of some time, just given that these, the surveys would be distributed and all of that. It looks like March of 2023. So we really do have some time, but if we wanted to sort of periodically evaluate, we can discuss what that timeline would look like. And I definitely just want to seek feedback from everybody in terms of what they think would be helpful for a timeline in that respect, when they would like to kind of reconvene. And I also want to, just speak with our legislative colleagues here to see what their perspective is in terms of what the, Committee on Higher Ed and Employment Advancement would actually like from the council, given their oversight. So I'm definitely going to kind of seek out some feedback from there before moving forward with making any concrete plans. But I figured it was at least worth discussion to see what everybody believed, would be important to kind of bring to the table for them and see if they would like us to convene for discussion. Any other comments about our moving forward? Great. So 2 weeks from now would be February 8th. So that's the timeline for the projects we've all been designated. We'll be in touch with everyone just to sort of clarify what everyone is sort of volunteered for, seek volunteers who are perhaps unable to join us today at the meeting, but are still members of the council. Keeping in mind as well that in reviewing the legislation, that anybody who has now missed each of our meetings, given that we have met, as a council 3 times, anybody who has not come to a meeting at this point is deemed to have resigned from our council. But keeping in mind the folks that have attended a meeting thus far, I just want to see what they would like to potentially contribute to as well. So definitely keep an eye out from contact from me in regards to those projects. Again, if you're watching this live stream or watching it later, and then of course all of you on the call here today. So I just wanted to make space for any miscellaneous comments, concerns, or topics that anybody wanted to bring to the council today. That was all I had on the agenda that I wanted to complete. In terms of future meetings, I'll be in touch, but I don't necessarily think we need to put something on the calendar right now. Perhaps if we could sort of evaluate through this process to see if we would want to get together again and actually speak and discuss as a council before presenting our deliverable here, or if we think we've all reviewed it, we have a draft we're all happy with, let's move forward with its, publication and distribution without meeting. I don't want to have any meeting that isn't necessary, just in honoring everyone's time. So if you would all just provide some feedback, get out readily as well in terms of as you're going through this, whether or not you feel it necessary to meet again, that would be great. And we can schedule a meeting then if need be. But I also want to be aware of the upcoming legislative session and the start to that, and the fact that our legislative partners, especially are going to be extremely busy, as well as the CTN airwaves. All right. So, Lisa, I see a hand up.
I just wanted to thank Lily because you put in so much extra work with these templates that we're all going to use as a guide. It's really valuable. So thank you so much for that extra work.
I'm very appreciative. It's really so helpful in keeping us organized and moving forward. And I want to thank you all for, your volunteering in different capacities for these projects. I appreciate all the work everyone's putting in, and I'm confident that we'll be able to present something that we can be proud of. Any other feedback? Questions, concerns, comments? All right. Well, I'm definitely thankful for not only each of your, the work you volunteered for, but also your presence today, and your input in moving forward with this has just been so helpful. And again, I think are going to contribute to a really excellent deliverable. And again, shout out to Lily for volunteering to create these documents to keep us organized. So if somebody would like to make a motion to adjourn, provided there is not a last minute interjection, feel free to motion, because that is all I had for us all today.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you again for your time.